Imagine a central figure in the greatest spiritual event of mankind, and now imagine that almost nothing is said about him. This is the enigma that surrounds Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, a man present at an absolutely crucial moment in history, the birth of Christ, and who soon after is swallowed by the silence of the sacred texts. Why does the figure who welcomed, protected, and guided Jesus in his early years disappear almost without a trace? The absence of information doesn't seem to be just a narrative gap. It's almost as if it were an intentional omission, shrouded in mist and purpose. When we look at the Gospels, Joseph appears in a punctual way. He is mentioned as a righteous man, a carpenter from Nazareth, and the groom of Mary. However, his presence is almost symbolic, reduced to minimal actions and no recorded words. In a world where every action of biblical characters is scrutinized, why is the earthly father of the Messiah treated with such reserve? This is where the first suspicions arise that we are dealing with something much larger than it appears. A silence that is not forgetfulness but protection. Not an omission due to irrelevance, but an intentional preservation. The Jewish culture of the time deeply valued genealogy, ancestry, and the paternal role. A Messiah who was to come from the lineage of David needed proof of this descent, and who represented this bridge, if not Joseph. Yet, while Mary is exalted, venerated, revered for centuries, Joseph remains almost invisible. There are no accounts of his death. We do not know how many years he lived. He simply disappears. What is being hidden? An ordinary man would not be so carefully concealed. This deliberate erasure has led scholars, mystics, and alternative historians to rethink the figure of Joseph from a different perspective. What if he were not just a humble carpenter? What if his mission was part of something much deeper? A mission that involved not only the creation of Jesus, but also the safeguarding of an ancient lineage and spiritual knowledge. The history of the world is filled with characters who were discreet on the surface, but giants in secret. Joseph seems to fit perfectly into this pattern. Many spiritual researchers suggest that Joseph's role was preserved for esoteric reasons. Some propose that he was part of an initiatory fraternity, secret groups formed to preserve sacred knowledge, which were active long before Jesus was born. These groups saw the arrival of Christ as an event not only prophesied, but also meticulously prepared. And Joseph would be one of the guardians of this arrival, an initiate whose life needed to remain hidden to protect the greater plan. What further reinforces this possibility is the fact that Jose appears at the right moments and disappears when the plan is already underway. He emerges to receive instructions to accept Maria and protect the child. He acts precisely when fleeing to Egypt after the dream with the angel. He protects Jesus in his childhood and then vanishes. This trajectory is not common. It is almost a programmed performance, like a silent agent who fulfills his role and then returns to the shadows. Another important element is the symbolism of the name Joseph itself. In the Old Testament, another Joseph, son of Jacob, was also a dreamer, also went to Egypt, also saved his family, and played a crucial role in divine designs. Therefore, the name carries a symbolic weight that echoes mission, discretion, and fidelity. Would it be a coincidence that Jesus' earthly father carried this exact same name, suggesting a spiritual and initiatory continuity between them? If we look at historical records, we notice a pattern of erasure around figures who hold hidden knowledge. The Essenes, for example, were a fraternity that operated on the fringes of Jewish society and retreated to the desert. Their silence was their protection, and many believe that Joseph was connected to this order, or a similar one, which understood the magnitude of Christ's coming and secretly prepared for the arrival of this new spiritual cycle. The carpentry, Joseph's trade, also raises questions. There is no clear evidence that a carpenter was merely a woodworker. The Greek term used to describe him, tekton, could mean either builder or architect. This opens room for us to understand that Joseph might have been a master builder, someone with knowledge of sacred geometry, symbolic construction, and even spiritual architecture. a true initiate in ancient knowledge, using his profession as a cover. Another fact that prompts reflection is the silence of the Gospels themselves on any words spoken by him. Not a single sentence is recorded from his mouth. There is no speech, there is no dialogue. This, within mystical traditions, is highly symbolic. Silence is one of the first precepts of any initiatory fraternity. The initiate keeps secrets, observes, acts in silence. Therefore, the absence of Joseph's words could be a hidden signature of his initiatory position. When Jesus begins his mission, Joseph is no longer present. Everything suggests that he fulfilled his part in the plan even before the son's first public miracle. This is highly significant, which leads us to think, was his mission to prepare Christ and then disappear so that the focus would never be diverted? Could he be the guardian who protects the bearer of light and then returns to anonymity, like so many masters did before him? Therefore, the silence surrounding Joseph seems more like a veil than a void. A veil that conceals one of the most intriguing figures in sacred history. What did he know? Where did he truly come from? Who did he learn from? And why did he choose silence as a tool? The next sections will lead us down deeper paths, investigating forgotten lineages, mystery schools, and possible secret orders he might have been part of. And perhaps at the end of this journey, we may realize that Joseph was not just the earthly father of Jesus, but the last link in a millennia-old chain of carefully guarded spiritual wisdom. From the most ancient times, lineages have been the foundation of spiritual traditions and power structures in the ancient world. In the case of Israel, David's lineage was regarded not just as noble descent, but as a direct link to divine promises. Being a descendant of David meant, according to the prophets, being aligned with God's messianic plan. It was from this bloodline that the Redeemer would come, the one who would renew the covenant with humanity. And it is precisely here that the figure of Joseph takes on a new dimension. He was not just an ordinary man chosen at random. He carried a deeply meaningful ancestral legacy. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke present distinct genealogies of Jesus, but both converge on one point. The lineage of David passes through Joseph. This is crucial, as within Jewish culture, genealogical legitimacy was established through the father. Even though Jesus was born of divine conception according to Christian faith, his social and legal insertion as the son of David occurred through Joseph's inheritance. Therefore, Joseph's presence was not merely symbolic, but strategic. He was the bearer of a sacred lineage, and his role could not be anything other than the guardian and transmitter of this ancient bloodline. But why has the Davidic lineage become so shrouded in mystery? After the Babylonian exile, the descendants of David began to live in the shadows, hidden, fearing political and religious persecutions. The throne of Israel had been usurped by foreigners, and the true heirs had to disappear to survive. In this context, secret fraternities emerged with the mission to protect these lineages and prepare them for the moment of the messianic return. Joseph, most likely, was born within this environment. It would not be surprising if he had been trained from a young age for this silent and grand mission. Rabbinic records and apocryphal texts refer to groups that kept secret genealogical records, known as the Books of the Righteous, or Books of Genealogies. These documents were not available to the common people, but were maintained by initiated families, who knew the importance of keeping the royal lineage alive without attracting the attention of the Roman Empire. The House of David was, therefore, a hidden dynasty, and Joseph, its most silent yet essential representative. Furthermore, it's important to understand that David's lineage was more than just political. It carried a spiritual frequency. Each generation contained initiates who maintained the vibration of the covenant, the promise made by God to David that his descendants would rule not just Israel, but human hearts, through divine wisdom and light. Joseph, in this sense, was more than a genetic link. He was a spiritual vessel, a transmitter of an invisible force that needed to be preserved so that the birth of Jesus would occur under the correct frequency. This energetic dimension of the Davidic lineage is mentioned in mystical traditions such as Kabbalah, where it talks about nitzotzot, divine sparks that pass through generations until they reach their fullness in an enlightened being. Jesus would be the full manifestation of these accumulated sparks over the centuries, and Joseph, the guardian of the last spark before the light explodes into the world, a role that could not be conferred to just anyone. He would have to be prepared in body, mind, and spirit for this silent mission. Joseph's role also becomes even more intriguing when we consider the importance of the tribe of Judah, to which David belonged. This tribe was known for its strength, leadership, and loyalty to traditions. Its members, even during periods of exile and foreign domination, kept the flame of the messianic promise alive. They knew that the Messiah would come from among them, and many dedicated themselves to preserving the pure lineage and teachings. It's plausible to imagine Joseph as one of the last remnants of this tribe, tasked with ensuring that the sacred lineage wasn't lost, neither by blood nor by wisdom. Another deep layer of this discussion involves the children of light, a reference used in the Dead Sea Scrolls to designate the guardians of divine truth. These texts, attributed to the Essenes, speak of a spiritual battle between the children of light and the children of darkness. Joseph, silent and righteous, may have been one of these children of light, and not just due to his character, but by mission. He would protect the bearer of the embodied light, not by chance, but by spiritual designation of a much older order. The figure of Joseph also challenges the superficial view on power and royalty. The lineage of David, even in Joseph's time, did not flaunt thrones or crowns. Their heirs were among the humble, the workers, the common men in the eyes of the world. But spiritually, they were invisible kings. Their royalty was not of the world, but of the Spirit. This inversion is profound. The king without a throne, the heir without a palace, but with the ancestral flame burning in his chest. Joseph is the symbol of this divine inversion. True power is discreet, silent, and indestructible. It's worth noting that many ancient traditions, Egyptian, Chaldean, Persian, also placed importance on spiritual lineages. It was not enough to be born into a royal family. One had to be initiated, understand the mysteries, carry within oneself the memory of the divine purpose. Joseph may have undergone these rites, and his connection with Egypt, as we will see later, may not have been a mere escape, but a symbolic return to the cradle of the oldest spiritual initiations. Thus, instead of seeing Joseph merely as an obedient carpenter, we should start to perceive him as the last visible link in a royal and sacred chain that had been protected for millennia. A man who knew who he was, who knew who was about to be born, and who silently prepared himself, away from the world's gaze, to be the guardian of this arrival. This perception changes everything. We are no longer in front of a supporting character. We are facing a hidden pillar, an invisible patriarch, whose mission was as essential as that of the Divine Mother herself. In this way, the lineage of David ceases to be just a genealogical detail and reveals itself as a trail of light that runs through centuries, crosses wars, exiles, and persecutions, until it finds shelter in the heart of a quiet man named Joseph, a man who accepted to disappear from history so that the true story could be born. And it is only when we look beyond the surface, with the eyes of the soul, that we begin to see how grand his task was. During the period of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, between the 6th century BC and the 1st century AD, Palestine was the stage for an intense but silent spiritual effervescence. Beyond the formal religiosity of the Pharisees and Sadducees, who dominated the temples and public debates, there was an underground network of fraternities preserving a much older wisdom, passed down orally, symbolically, and initiatively. These fraternities did not show themselves to the world. They operated in the shadows, as guardians of the original knowledge, waiting for a new spiritual cycle. And it is in this context that Joseph seems to have been formed, not by the pomp of the synagogues, but by the depth of the millennial secrets. One of the most well-known of these orders were the Essenes, mentioned by historians such as Flavius Josephus, Philo of Alexandria, and Pliny the Elder. They lived in seclusion on the shores of the Dead Sea, especially in the region of Qumran, but they also had communities in cities like Nazareth, where Joseph lived. The Essenes practiced a life of purity, silence, fasting, scripture study, and contemplation. They believed in the imminent coming of the Messiah and prepared carefully for it, not with weapons, but with spiritual discipline. Their teachings were reserved only for the initiated, and their entry rites required years of preparation. It is almost impossible to ignore the parallels between Joseph and these men. The reserved lifestyle, the concern for justice, obedience to the signs of the spiritual world, and above all, the role of protector of the Messiah. Many alternative scholars assert that Joseph not only knew the Essenes, but was one of them, or at least affiliated with a fraternity with similar principles. Perhaps an even older branch, carrying the mysteries of the Egyptian, Hebrew, and even Persian schools. After all, mysteries are like subterranean rivers. They flow through different civilizations, but carry the same essence. These fraternities did not view the birth of the Messiah as something random. For them, Christ was not just a historical figure, but a cosmic event, awaited with astronomical and spiritual precision. Therefore, they had been preparing for centuries, keeping secret records, star maps, hidden teachings, and prophetic codes. When the time was ripe, they would need to be ready, not to act publicly, but to energetically support the transition. Joseph, as part of this sacred mechanism, would be designated to protect the bearer of the new light from birth. But for that, he needed to be much more than a father. He needed to be an initiate, someone who knew the signs, who understood the symbology, who knew how to move between the visible and the invisible. The mystery schools of the time offered this type of training. They did not teach doctrine, but transformation. Their teachings were based on metaphors, parables, deep meditations, perception exercises, and silence. Silence, in fact, was the first step on the initiatory ladder. Only those who learned to quiet the ego could hear the voice of the Spirit, and Joseph is the man of silence par excellence. There are indirect records suggesting the existence of a spiritual network among the Jews of Galilee, Egypt, and even Babylon, where traditions such as the Kabbalah began to secretly emerge. This network shared mystical visions about the coming of the Messiah, about the purification of the world, and about the end of a spiritual cycle of humanity. Within these networks, there was talk of a guardian, someone who would bring Christ into the world, but who would never be glorified. Their role would be essential, but invisible. This description perfectly coincides with the figure of Joseph. Another interesting aspect to consider are the Therapeutae, a spiritual community close to the Essenes, mentioned by Philo. They lived in Egypt in retreat, cultivating healing through the soul, harmony with nature, and the study of sacred texts. Some assert that Joseph may have been initiated by this order during the period he spent in Egypt with Mary and Jesus. If this is true, the flight to Egypt would have been, in fact, a return, not a mere search for physical safety, but a continuation of their spiritual journey. There, he could have received instructions, reinforced his mission, and strengthened his spirit. The structure of these fraternities was almost always hierarchical and symbolic. There were initiation degrees, rites of passage, internal tests. The goal was not external power, but inner mastery. The initiate needed to control his emotions, transcend the ego, awaken the hidden senses of the soul. All this resonates in Jose's posture, firm, present, fair, but without any vanity. He acts with spiritual precision, as someone who knows exactly what he is doing, even without receiving laurels or recognition. The mystery schools also taught the value of the paternal archetype as an expression of the divine. The father was not just the physical provider, but the transmitter of wisdom, the reflection of the Creator, the guardian of the light that has not yet shone. In many ancient traditions, the initiate's father was an initiate himself. The son was not born by chance, but by spiritual planning. This concept resonates strongly with Joseph's mission, to prepare the body and the path for the one who would bring a new era of consciousness to humanity. It's worth noting that these fraternities were not exclusive to the Jews. There was an interconnection between the schools of the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, the Zoroastrians, and the Pythagoreans. They spoke different languages, but taught universal truths. In many of them, the coming of a solar master, a bearer of divine light, a new Adam was prophesied, and all pointed to the same historical period. Joseph, inserted in this scenario, seems to have been a piece precisely placed on the chessboard of time. A messenger, a hidden initiate, a servant of light, not with words, but with presence. That's why understanding Joseph as a member of an ancestral brotherhood completely changes the meaning of his mission. He ceases to be just the adoptive father of Jesus and becomes the link between the old world and the new, a silent initiate, trained in the schools of the Spirit, who held the light when it was still fragile. He knew the plan. He knew what was to come, and he chose, with humility and courage, to disappear so that the truth could shine through the other. Few events in the New Testament carry as dense a symbolism as Joseph's journey with Mary and baby Jesus to Egypt. In the biblical narrative, it is a flight. An angel would have warned Joseph about Herod's plans to kill the newborn, leading him to abandon Galilee and seek refuge in Egyptian lands. However, when we observe this episode through the eyes of ancient initiatory traditions, we realize that this journey carries elements of a true spiritual rite. It was not just a flight, it was a crossing, a return, a reunion with the roots of ancestral wisdom. Egypt for millennia was the cradle of the most powerful and sophisticated mystery schools in the ancient world. There, priests, astronomers, spiritual architects, and philosophers developed a profound cosmology, connecting man with cosmic cycles and invisible worlds. From the pyramids, built as temples of initiation, to the Hermetic teachings of Thoth, everything in Egypt pointed to a type of knowledge that surpassed the religious. It was sacred science, it was metaphysics, it was living spirituality. Going to Egypt for the ancients was like returning to the origin of knowledge. In this sense, the presence of Joseph in Egypt takes on a new dimension. Being a possible initiate into the secret traditions of his time, this journey would not only be a physical refuge, but also a plunge into the womb of hidden wisdom. He was not just saving his son. He was bringing the newly incarnated Christ to the heart of ancient knowledge, as if the one who would come to renew the world needed first to touch the stones of old wisdom. And Joseph was the perfect guide for this. A guardian who knew the paths, the codes, the silent masters. Egypt also holds a central place in Jewish tradition. It was there that Joseph, the son of Jacob, became governor and savior of his family. It was there that Moses was raised, where he challenged the Pharaoh and led the people to freedom. Jesus' journey repeats this cycle. From Egypt comes the liberator, the new Moses, and once again, it is a Joseph who guides him on this path. The repetition of names and events is not casual. It is a symbolic signature, a hidden language spanning centuries, a divine pattern discreetly unfolding. Furthermore, the Therapeuti, a spiritual group associated with the Essenes, had communities in Egypt, particularly in the Alexandria region. These men lived apart from the world, practicing meditation, silence, scripture study, and spiritual healings. Some researchers believe that Joseph kept contact with these groups during his stay. This means that while physically protecting the Christ child, he was also introducing him to the highest spiritual vibrations of the time. It was as if he was tuning Jesus from childhood with the subtle fields of ancestral knowledge. Another powerful perspective is the initiatory symbolism of the journey. In many mystery schools, the candidate for enlightenment had to undergo a symbolic death, a departure from home, a plunge into the unknown, followed by a transformed return. This structure, referred to as the monomyth or the hero's journey, is present in all major spiritual traditions. The trip to Egypt, in this context, is the descent into the underworld, not as a place of darkness, but as the depth of being, where forgotten secrets lie. And Joseph, in this role, is the mentor of the crossing. There are also profound parallels between this journey and the alchemical processes. Egypt was known as Chem, the Black Land, the origin of the word alchemy. In alchemical symbolism, matter needs to pass through the nigredo, the black phase of decomposition, before being reborn in light. Taking Jesus to Egypt is, symbolically, immersing him in this phase. It is preparing his essence to later transmute the world. And who better to guide him through this underground journey than a father who had already gone through his own initiation and silence processes? And there's more. The silence surrounding Joseph's stay in Egypt is almost total. The Gospels say nothing about what happened during this period. How long did they stay? Where did they live? Who did they interact with? This narrative void can be interpreted as yet another protective veil. Those years were so sacred, so transformative, that they could not be exposed to the vulgarity of words. They were years of preparation, of inner awakening, of hidden instructions. And Joseph, always discreet, would be responsible for ensuring that this sacred field was preserved. Many mystics claim that Egypt harbors energetic portals. They believe that its buildings, temples, and tombs were erected at specific points on Earth, aligned with the stars and with vibrational fields that facilitate contact with the divine. Bringing Jesus into this environment would be like bathing him in a subtle frequency, awakening dormant spiritual memories. Joseph, being knowledgeable of these principles, would have taken his son there not just for protection, but for initiation, not with words, but with presence, with silence, with the vibration of the ancestral land. And this leads us to another significant revelation. Perhaps the true function of Joseph in the divine plan was not just to protect, but to awaken, to be the silent catalyst of a consciousness that was already divine, but needed to remember. Just like the masters of the old schools prepared the bodies and minds to receive the spark of the Spirit, Joseph prepared the childhood soil for the light of Christ to blossom. He was like a hidden gardener, tending to the roots, watering in silence, waiting for the time of flowering. Finally, the return from Egypt is also symbolic. In Matthew it is written, "Out of Egypt I called my son," a direct quote from the prophet Hosea. This phrase, full of meaning, marks the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. Egypt fulfilled its role. The boy was ready. The guardian Joseph had completed another stage of the mission. And as always, without fuss, without glory, without recognition, but with the deep certainty that he had contributed to the rebirth of light upon the earth. When the Gospels tell us that Joseph was a carpenter, the modern tendency is to visualize an ordinary craftsman, carving wood, building furniture, living in a simple and honest manner. But this is a shallow view of a profession that, over time, has been surrounded by symbolism and reverence. In the ancient world, being a carpenter, or better said, a tekton, as it appears in the Greek text, was more than being a manual laborer. It was to be a builder of both the visible and the invisible. And this distinction is essential to understand the real role of Joseph. The word tekton carries multiple meanings. It can mean craftsman, architect, engineer, master builder. In various traditions, the builder is the one who understands the laws of creation, both on the physical and spiritual plane. He understands measures, proportions, balances. He not only builds houses, he invokes harmony. Geometry in these contexts was not just a technical science, but a sacred one, a map of the cosmos, and the one who mastered it was considered an initiate. Therefore, Joseph's craft places him among the masters of the hidden stroke, those who build with consciousness. The ancient civilizations knew that the universe operates according to geometric patterns. The circle, the square, the triangle, the spiral. These shapes are not just figures, but expressions of divine laws. Sacred geometry is present in nature, in the human body, in plants, in celestial bodies, in temples. Building in harmony with these principles was considered a form of devotion, an act of communion with the Creator. In this context, the initiated carpenters were priests of space. Each measurement, each angle, each cut was a geometric prayer. It is within this tradition that Jose possibly operated. He was not a simple worker. He was a knower of divine proportions. He knew how space influences consciousness, how the environment shapes the spirit. He may have learned this in initiatory schools like those of the Essens, or during his stay in Egypt. It would not be surprising if he had access to Hermetic teachings, Pythagorean wisdom, or the rites of the master builders who would later give rise to the guilds that would become medieval masonry. In the mystical tradition, the builder symbolizes the one who gives shape to the invisible. He translates the idea into matter. He manifests the spirit in the world, and this resonates strongly with Joseph's mission, to support the birth of the light. He was the builder of the house where Christ would grow, the shaper of the physical and vibrational space where a new consciousness would develop. Not only literally, but also spiritually. Joseph shaped wood, yes, but he also shaped the sacred environment that would welcome the awakening of the Messiah. Sacred geometry possesses codes that operate directly on the human subconscious. Therefore, great masters like Pythagoras, Plato, and Leonardo da Vinci studied it deeply. They knew that certain shapes awaken higher states of consciousness. Joseph, as a tecton master, probably understood these effects. His work might have involved building vibrational structures, spaces that channeled harmony, protection, and light. He didn't just build houses, he built invisible temples for the soul. It is possible that Joseph's profession was a carefully inserted metaphor in the Gospels to reveal his spiritual nature without violating vows of silence. The esoteric tradition has always used symbolic layers to protect its teachings. Just as Jesus used parables, Joseph used wood. Each plank he cut, each object he created, was an expression of cosmic order. And by teaching this craft to Jesus, as many suggest he did, he was imparting much more than a trade. He was sharing a worldview. This symbolic inheritance of carpentry resonates to this day in initiatory traditions. In Freemasonry, for example, the degrees of apprentice, fellow, and master are associated with the builder's tools, the compass, the square, the hammer. Each of these tools represents a stage in the inner journey. Joseph, as Master of Masters, already carried these symbols before any formal organization existed. He was the archetype of the master builder, not of stones, but of consciousness. Furthermore, the great builders of antiquity operated based on universal laws that united the micro and macrocosm. They knew that, as above, so below, a fundamental Hermetic principle. They applied this in their works, replicating celestial proportions on the earthly plane. Joseph, with this knowledge, not only erected physical structures, but aligned his life with the great project. His carpentry was a reflection of divine architecture, and each of his works was, in essence, an altar. There is an element of profound beauty in this vision. Joseph, silent and invisible to the world, expressed his wisdom with his hands. While many sought recognition through words, he left sacred traces in every creation. In a time of speeches and religious disputes, Joseph spoke with shapes, with angles, with balance. His life was a divine project under construction, and his legacy, although overlooked by many, remains in the fine print of time, in the invisible foundations of the path that Jesus walked. On a higher plane, we could say that Joseph was not just a carpenter, he was a guardian of the divine trait. He was the one who recognized the geometry of the soul, and by building with integrity, simplicity, and presence, he prepared not only a house for Christ, but a subtle path for the light to find form in this world. Every piece of wood touched by his hands carried the echo of ancient wisdom, that every creation, big or small, is a mirror of the Creator. In the biblical narrative, there's a detail that, although subtle, screams to the ears of those who know how to listen. Joseph never speaks. Not a single word from him was recorded. He doesn't preach, doesn't make speeches, doesn't question. He simply acts, obeys, protects, dreams, and disappears. For many, this is just a narrative detail. For the attentive, it's a spiritual signature. Joseph's silence isn't an absence of speech, it's a presence of purpose. And when we look through the lenses of the initiatory tradition, we begin to see this silence not as passivity, but as an intentional choice, even a sacred vow. At the heart of mystery schools, silence is more than a virtue. It is the first step on the initiatory ladder. Every apprentice, before receiving any revelation, must learn to be silent. To silence the ego, the opinions, the noise of the mind. Silence allows one to hear what is hidden. In this sense, Joseph appears as a true initiate. He does not speak, but acts with wisdom. His decisions are precise. He dreams of angels, interprets signs, moves with spiritual confidence. All this without uttering a single word. This is typical of someone who knows much more than they appear to. But why is silence so valued in esoteric traditions? Because words, when misused, dissipate energy. They reveal what should be protected. They expose what should be cultivated in secret. True spiritual knowledge is conveyed on subtle levels, through symbols, gestures, silent companionship. Masters speak little, and only when necessary. The silence of Joseph places him among the great guardians of invisible wisdom. He does not explain, he embodies. And for that reason, he transforms. It's possible that Jose made a vow of silence, as was common in some spiritual orders of his time. The Essenes, for example, practiced long periods of silence as a form of purification and concentration. Other groups, like the Therapeuti in Egypt, also saw silence as a bridge between the human and the divine. An initiate who received a sacred mission, such as protecting Christ, would have plenty of reasons to seal his lips. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. Silence would be his shield, his armor, his purest language. Silence also has a therapeutic quality. It heals. It reorganizes. It allows the spirit to find a home amidst the noise of the world. Joseph, in his restrained demeanor, offers the Holy Family an environment of stability, peace, and centeredness. He is the silent pillar that supports the invisible temple. Without his steadfastness, without his ability to listen rather than speak, the birth of Christ would not have found the fertile soil necessary to flourish. He is therefore the guardian of divine silence, the protector of the sacred frequency that surrounds the Word before it manifests. There is also the symbolic aspect. The earthly father of the Word, the Logos, as John defines Jesus, does not speak. This is of astounding depth. What does this tell us? That the Word is born from silence, that the divine Word can only emerge from the inner void. Joseph, the silent man, prepares the ground for the Word to incarnate. His absence of speech is paradoxically the most eloquent speech in the Scriptures. He teaches, with his life, that one must empty oneself to welcome the divine. Historically, the figure of Joseph was little celebrated, especially in the first centuries of Christianity. While Mary was exalted as the Divine Mother, Joseph was treated as a secondary figure. However, in the deeper traditions, this discrete position is highly revealing. In the mystery schools, the true master never places himself at the center. He operates on the margins, in the rear, creating space for the other to shine. Joseph does not vie for the spotlight. He serves. And in that lies his greatness. Moreover, the silence of José can be seen as a mechanism of spiritual protection. In times of persecution, political conflict, and religious manipulation, speaking could jeopardize not only his life, but also the mission he bore. Keeping quiet was therefore a strategic act, but it was also a ritual gesture. In many ancient traditions, silence in the face of the sacred was the ultimate sign of respect. In the presence of Christ's incarnation, José falls silent, not because he has nothing to say, but because he knows what is happening. His silence also echoed at home. Imagine growing up next to a father who barely speaks, but whose presence emanates wisdom, peace, and security. For Jesus, this must have been deeply formative. Joseph didn't need to teach with words. His own life was a living parable. Every gesture, every decision, every silence was a lesson. He showed that true power doesn't shout. It resonates. It doesn't impose. It sustains. And it is in this model that Jesus probably shaped his own way of being. In the Eastern Christian tradition, Joseph is revered as the righteous. This title has far more spiritual than moral connotations. It signifies someone aligned with the divine will, someone who not only obeys but understands the mysteries of right action. The righteous act at the right time, in the right way, with a silent heart. And that is exactly what Joseph represents. He is the man who hears heaven in dreams, who responds with deeds, and who withdraws when his mission is accomplished. There is no vanity, no self-assertion, only silent service. As we disappear from words, we become channels of the eternal. This is the hidden teaching of Joseph. He reminds us that the world is saturated with empty talk, but thirsty for authentic presences. And his figure remains, throughout the centuries, as an invitation to introspection, to inner listening, to trust in the invisible. He is the protector of the mystery. And for that very reason, his story remains shrouded in veils that only attentive hearts can penetrate. By understanding Joseph's silence as a conscious spiritual act, the entire narrative takes on a new light. He is not absent from the story. He is the sacred space where the story can unfold. He is the invisible chalice that sustains the divine presence. And his lack of words is, in fact, a continuous prayer, a gesture of surrender, an eternal whisper in the ears of those who seek the truth beyond appearances. The Bible, as we know it today, is the result of centuries of selections, councils, theological disputes, and political decisions. In the 4th century, under Emperor Constantine and with the Council of Nicaea, a canon was defined. Many texts were accepted, others rejected. The rejected ones came to be called apocryphal, meaning hidden. But this term does not necessarily mean false. Often these texts were excluded because they presented spiritual views that were very advanced, symbolic, or simply different from the official narrative. And when it comes to Joseph, these apocryphal writings offer us a portrait that breaks the silence imposed by the canonical tradition. In the Proto-Evangelium of James, one of the oldest and most revered apocryphal texts of early Christianity, Joseph is portrayed as an older man, a widower, with children from a previous marriage. He is not presented as a young husband, but as a chosen guardian to protect Mary and the mystery of divine incarnation. His selection, according to this text, occurs through a spiritual sign, a dry branch that miraculously blooms in his hands. This symbol is incredibly powerful and cannot be ignored. It refers to divine choice, to the blossoming of life from the invisible. The blooming staff is the symbol of the chosen initiate. This image of Joseph already reveals something profound. He was known among the wise. If he participated in a special selection to guard Mary, it means he was part of a circle of righteous and spiritually prepared men. He was not a simple, ordinary citizen. He was someone recognized as capable of protecting one of the greatest mysteries in human history. The responsibility of guarding Mary and the incarnate Word could not be given to someone without spiritual structure. It was a mission for an initiate, for a man of wisdom, humility, and silence. In other texts, such as the Gospel of the Nativity of Mary and the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, we see Joseph being constantly guided by dreams, visions, and celestial signs. This reinforces the idea that he possessed a high spiritual sensitivity. The ability to receive instructions from the spiritual world is characteristic of natural mediums or initiates who have undergone long disciplines of purification and inner listening. Joseph, in these accounts, is always obedient to the voice of the invisible. He listens and acts with absolute faith, a typical behavior of those who are already familiar with the spiritual path. These apocryphal writings also emphasize his purity of heart, his righteousness, and his total dedication to the divine plan. He accepts Mary even knowing the judgment he would face, agrees to be the guardian of a son he did not father, and puts his life at risk on multiple occasions to protect this holy family. He acts as a consecrated man, not as someone caught off guard by fate. There is wisdom in his choices. There is conscious surrender. There is a spiritual calling. Interestingly, in the apocryphal texts, Joseph is much more present than in the canonical ones. He appears in more episodes, participates more actively in the lives of Mary and Jesus, and is often portrayed with a reverence that borders on the sacred. This makes us wonder, why then was he silenced in the official version of the narrative? What kind of discomfort did his presence cause to the power structures and doctrines of the time? Was he a threat to the central figure of Mary? Or perhaps, by revealing himself as an initiate, would he risk exposing the secrets that the orders wish to keep hidden? A fascinating point emerges when we compare Joseph to figures like Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. While Zechariah speaks, questions, and even doubts, being therefore temporarily silenced by an angel, Joseph, on the other hand, listens and obeys without hesitation. This contrast reinforces the idea that Joseph was already beyond doubt. He operated at a level of consciousness where the divine plan did not need to be explained, only recognized and executed. This distinction is crucial for us to understand his spiritual function. Some Gnostic traditions, which also produced texts considered apocryphal, speak about the need to hide certain truths from the uninitiated. For the Gnostics, spiritual knowledge was not something for everyone. It required preparation, purity, and intention. In this context, Joseph appears as the one who guards the mystery, literally. He protects the Virgin's womb, which symbolizes the sacred portal of the new creation. He is the guardian of the living temple, a role that demands not just moral righteousness, but deep esoteric knowledge. In later versions of the Eastern Christian tradition, such as in Ethiopian texts and Coptic legends, Joseph is portrayed with great dignity. In these accounts, he is not a supporting character, but the silent protagonist of the divine saga. He lives until the age of 111, being escorted to heaven by angels at the end of his journey. These details reinforce the image of a man who transcends the usual role of adoptive father. He is seen as someone touched by the divine, a conscious partner in the birth of the new spiritual era brought by Jesus. The fact that so many apocryphal versions highlight Joseph with such emphasis leads us to an inevitable conclusion. The spiritual world recognizes him. Even though official theology has chosen to silence his presence, the deep currents of Christian spirituality have kept him alive in marginal texts, in popular legends, and in oral traditions. Joseph continued to be remembered by those who are not satisfied with the surface, by those who seek the invisible behind the visible history. These texts also show us something that institutional tradition has hidden for centuries. Joseph and Mary formed a spiritual unity. They were not just a couple out of convenience. They represented the union of the sacred masculine and feminine, both prepared to support the birth of Christ. He with his silent action and his constructive wisdom. She with her mystical surrender and her divine receptivity. Together they formed the temple where light could incarnate. Therefore, the apocryphal Gospels not only fill narrative gaps, they reveal the true greatness of Joseph. They show us that he was more than a supporting character. He was an initiate, a master of silence, a sacred builder, and above all, the guardian of the greatest mystery ever manifested on earth. Since ancient times, great spiritual truths have never been communicated directly. The sacred is not shouted, it is whispered behind symbols, archetypes, repetitive patterns that cross cultures and epochs. In the case of Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, this rule applies perfectly. He is a figure cloaked in symbolic codes that, when deciphered, reveal a truth that the literal narrative dared not say. He was a guardian of ancient secrets. One of the first symbolic evidences that deserves attention is the name Jose itself. In Hebrew, Joseph means he who adds or God adds. This tells us a lot about his spiritual role. Jose is the one who completes, who sustains, who prepares the invisible ground so that something greater can manifest. He does not create Christ, but adds the necessary elements for his manifestation in the world. The name is a seal of mission. And in ancient traditions, the name is not a coincidence, it is a destiny. Another recurring symbol is that of Joseph's rod, which miraculously blossoms in the Proto-Evangelium of James. This dry stick that produces flowers is an incredibly powerful archetype. It also appears in stories such as that of Aaron, Moses' brother, whose rod blossomed as a sign of divine election. The rod represents spiritual power, legitimate authority, a channel of communication with the divine, and the fact that it blooms indicates that Joseph was not just chosen, he was spiritually fertile. He was an ancient trunk from which new life springs. The symbol of carpentry also constantly reappears as we explored earlier. But here, we must go beyond the literal profession and see it as an initiatory metaphor. The carpenter is the one who shapes matter according to the patterns of the Spirit. In symbolic terms, Joseph is the master who builds the invisible space where the divine incarnation can occur. He is the archetype of the great builder, the same one present in the traditions of the master masons, the architects of Solomon's temple, and the wise ones who knew the proportions of the soul and the universe. Another powerful symbolic detail is the role of Joseph in dreams. He is constantly guided by nightly visions, where angels speak to him and reveal what needs to be done. In symbolic terms, the dreamer is the one who moves between worlds. He lives with one foot in the visible and the other in the invisible. Joseph, therefore, is a traveler between dimensions. He is the man who does not move by logical reasoning, but by sacred intuition. This places him in a spiritual lineage that traces back to prophets, magicians, and seers. The disappearance of Joseph before the beginning of Jesus' ministry is also symbolic. He is present in the childhood, in the formation, in the first steps, but he disappears when the public mission begins. This represents something profound. The true master withdraws when the disciple is ready. He does not seek recognition nor protagonism. He prepares, strengthens, protects, and then disappears. Like the great initiators of the hidden traditions, Joseph represents the presence that shapes without imposing, that serves without showing off, that loves without possessing. In Christian iconography, Joseph often appears with the baby Jesus in his arms and a lily flower in his hand. The lily is a symbol of purity, silence, and initiation. It is also a symbol associated with the Virgin Mary. By carrying it, Joseph not only demonstrates chastity, he affirms his status as guardian of the feminine temple. He protects the divine feminine energy and the sacred fruit that was born from it. In alchemical terms, he is the salt that balances the sulfur and mercury, the stabilizing force that allows the union of heaven and earth. Another element rich in symbolism is the geography of Joseph's life. Nazareth, Bethlehem, Egypt. Each place carries a vibrational and symbolic weight. Nazareth, whose name may derive from netzer, sprout, bud, is the place of hidden blossoming. Bethlehem, the house of bread, is where spiritual nourishment is born. Egypt, as we have seen, is the initiatory womb. The very geographical movement of Joseph is a symbolic map of the soul's journey, from concealment to manifestation, to initiation, to return. He lives within himself the very trajectory of Christ as a vibrational precursor to the messianic journey. Even your absence of words is a symbol. In traditions like Kabbalah, silence is the matrix of all creation. The Ein Sof, the limitless, is absolute silence. From it emanates the word. Joseph, by silencing, becomes a mirror of Ein Sof. He guards the primordial silence from which Christ springs. In a mystical reading, he is the empty space that allows light to manifest. He is the pause before the divine symphony. And for that reason, his absence of speech is not weakness. It is spiritual power. The number of times that José appears also has symbolic importance. He emerges at key moments, at the turning points of the narrative. Like a hidden master, he operates behind the scenes, directing the flow of the story with precise gestures. This timely intervention reflects the principle of subtle interventionism, a concept present in many spiritual orders, where the masters do not show themselves, but act at critical moments to preserve the divine plan. José behaves like this, invisible but decisive. Furthermore, the very construction of the biblical canon can be seen as a symbolic gesture. By excluding Joseph from the centrality of the discourse, tradition left a gap that becomes a call to those who see beyond. The silence around Joseph is not forgetfulness. It is an invitation to investigation. It is a spiritual provocation, a call to contemplation. It's as if tradition were saying, here is something that only the eyes of the Spirit can see. And as we look deeper, we see that Joseph is everywhere, in the structure, in the base, in the vibration. Finally, the supreme symbolism might be this. José is the guardian of the invisible. He represents everything that supports, but doesn't appear. He is the pillar that no one sees, but that keeps the temple standing. He is the foundation of silent faith, of righteous action, of sacred service. His life is a continuous symbolic language, a hidden gospel written with gestures, with silence, with presence. Understanding José through the lens of symbolism reveals a profound truth. He was not hidden, he was veiled, as the sacred always is, as the mysteries always have been, and only those with eyes to see will see. The disappearance of Joseph from the official narrative of the New Testament has been, for centuries, a mystery shrouded in theories, speculations, and assumptions. He is present in Jesus' childhood, in critical decisions, in symbolic crossings, but then he vanishes, without announcement, without farewell, without details. Tradition says he died before the start of Jesus' public ministry, but this before is what interests us. What would Joseph have done in the last years before Jesus began his messianic journey? What spiritual mission could still be entrusted to him, the silent man, the invisible guardian? To understand this final stage, we need to revisit Joseph's role as the guardian of the light before it becomes public. He is the one who protects the essence before its revelation. Jesus' mission was, in essence, a cosmic sacrifice. But in order for this sacrifice to take place with full awareness, it was necessary to prepare the ground, physical, spiritual, and energetic. And this is exactly where Joseph comes in. Behind the scenes, preparing each necessary element so that the Messiah could fulfill his journey to the cross, and more deeply, to the resurrection. Numerous esoteric scholars and initiatory traditions assert that Joseph continued his mission even beyond the biblical narrative. He is said to have traveled, sought hidden allies, awakened silent consciousnesses, warned, and prepared the brothers of the path, those who, in due time, would recognize Christ and discreetly support him. These men and women would form an underground spiritual network, the bearers of the flame before the fire ignited in the world. Joseph is believed to have been the architect of this network. There are non-canonical reports suggesting that Joseph was involved with mystical circles in Egypt, Syria, and even Greece prior to his end. He is believed to have taken the child with him at critical moments, not only to protect her from Herod, but to connect her with ancient masters and spiritual centers that recognized Christ as part of a universal plan. This journey, which to the common eye appeared as an escape, may have actually been a traveling initiation, and in the following years, Joseph would have returned to these hubs to align the final elements of the plan. The Ethiopian tradition, for example, preserves oral records that associate Joseph with encounters with the wise men of the East and remnants of the Egyptian Hermetic schools. Some say that he brought news of the birth of the light to the temple of Heliopolis, and there received final spiritual instructions for his journey. These facts, although not historically confirmed, carry an impressive spiritual coherence. A man with the mission of protecting Christ could not simply disappear. He would have to seal his part in the plan with complete awareness and surrender. The silence of Jose can be understood as the master's period of retreat when the work is about to bloom, like the architect who leaves the construction site when the structure already stands on its own. But this withdrawal is not an absence. It is a type of presence that is even deeper. He was no longer visible because he was already present in Christ's consciousness. He had merged with the mission. His soul, his love, his wisdom were incorporated into the path that Jesus would now tread with his own feet. There are mystical traditions that say Joseph carried out a final mission, to convey to Jesus the last spiritual instructions before the journey of the cross. Instructions that could not be given by words, but by presence, by silence, by sharing consciousness. This transmission would have occurred at a special moment, out of the world's sight. A meeting between the silent master and the Messiah about to reveal himself. A gesture, a look, a vibration. And so the flame was passed with the deepest of silences. Another powerful theory is that Joseph may have been responsible for hiding knowledge and sacred objects that would be needed in an even more distant future. There are currents that link him to the Holy Grail, not as the bearer of the literal chalice, but as the one who prepared the vessel where the light would be deposited. The Grail, in this sense, is both Mary and Jesus, and Joseph is the guardian of the mystery of both. This view directly connects him with the archetypes of the temple guardian, present in so many esoteric traditions around the world. The absence of accounts about his death is also symbolic. Tradition merely assumes that he disappeared, but many ancient masters did not die. They left in silence. They withdrew when the work was done. Joseph may have left the world in the same way he lived, discreetly, peacefully, certain that he had fulfilled his mission perfectly. His body may have disappeared, but his vibration remains in every stone of the path that Jesus walked. He was not the star of the show, but the foundation upon which everything stood. Spiritually speaking, there is a line of thought that believes that Joseph offered his last breath to Christ. Not in a literal sense, but energetically. He dedicated his last days, his remaining strength, his very soul, so that the Son's mission could be fully accomplished. This is something only initiates understand. The Master's soul intertwines with the disciples. They become one purpose, one vibration, one expanding light. And when Jesus faced the desert, the trial, the cross, and the resurrection, Joseph was already there, not physically, but as an ancestral spiritual presence, as an invisible force field, as a vibrant memory of unconditional love. Joseph's silence echoed within Christ, guiding every gesture, every decision, every word. He was indeed the hidden father of the path, the one who planted, watered, and trusted that the flower would bloom at the right time, even if he himself was no longer present to see it. As we conclude this journey, we see that Joseph was not just the man who took care of the boy Jesus. He was the silent soul that set the stage for the greatest spiritual event in human history. He was the link between worlds, the invisible builder of the temple of the new age, the master who disappears so that the light may reveal itself. His name may have been silenced, his story forgotten, but his vibration continues to pulse in the heart of everyone who senses that true power does not make noise. It transforms in silence. Now that we've crossed this veil of mysteries and silences together, I invite you to delve even deeper into this ocean of wisdom, and tell me in the comments, what does the story of Joseph awaken within you? Do you feel you've also been called to protect something invisible, sacred, and transformative in your life? Joseph was the guardian of the divine plan. What silent mission are you nurturing within? Let's manifest together in the comments a space for collective awakening, where each response builds an invisible temple of consciousness. Comment below. Which part of Jose's mission touched your soul the most, and why? Your response could inspire someone who is exactly at the point where you've been before. And if this journey has ignited something within you, don't stop here. The truth continues to reveal itself. Watch now the next video that's already here on your screen. The Hidden Code of Sinai, the lost teaching of Jesus that could change the world. In this episode, we will explore a hidden teaching of Jesus that has been concealed for millennia and could change everything we think we know about our mission on Earth. Take a deep breath, because if you've made it this far, it's because the call is real. You are part of the awakening. You are mind unfettered.